You are now listening to Testimonies with Terry.
All right, guys. Well, I'm excited because today I get to talk with author, producer, and the co-founder of Your Story Is Not Done, the Media Missionary herself, Kat Vazquez. Kat, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Terry, it's a pleasure. Go Team Jesus.
Yes. I was telling you before we hit the record button that I was just randomly on Instagram, just scrolling, right? And they gave me the account, up on my feed of Your Story Is Not Done. And I immediately piqued my interest and I looked into it and, led me to you and your husband, George. And I'm just like, all right, these are my kind of people. They want to share testimonies with Terry. That's what I do. I got to connect with them and I got to hear Kat's story. And hopefully down the road, I get to hear George's story. But I just love how God uses anything and everything to connect people. So Kat, I am super excited for this.
Oh, me too, brother. I mean, he sure does. If he could use, a donkey, right? He's going to use social media.
Exactly. Well, Kat, we always start way at the beginning on this podcast. So let's start off with, where did you grow up? What was family life like for you growing up?
Well, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a fantastic home. My parents, they were committed in marriage to one another. And it was myself and my younger sister. My mom was a fantastic role model. I mean, I've got to be honest, I just had a really good, strong foundation. They, believed in getting us in church early. I had several women in my family who were leaders and kind of pioneers in ministry at that age. And so I had a lot of role models and women that I looked up to. And at a very young age, my mom kind of fostered the whole, the trust. You can come to me with any of your questions. And so that was really huge, growing in my faith, because, we can't be owning our parents' faith. It has to be real and personal and intimate for me alone. So because of that foundation, much later into my adult years, when I hit some really turbulent times, and that's primarily where I begin my story of redemption. I was in the news business, absolutely loved that career. Unfortunately, at one of the stations that I had worked at, I had a boss who was verbally and emotionally abusive. That is something that a lot of people today, they may not be comfortable talking about. They may not even recognize some of those symptoms. But later, that gentleman was fired. But anybody in the news business knows that you have to stick it out for at least 2 years for that station to qualify for sticking on your resume. So it was day in, day out abuse, and showing up on camera like nothing happened. And you have to keep your cool and stay confident and deliver your material. And you got to come back the next day and do it all over again. So as the weeks, months, year, and years rolled on, the damage had been done. And for anyone that sadly has gone through abuse or been in a relationship of abuse, you know that it's a slow unraveling. It's a slow burn, a slow fade. And within that time frame, I had not only lost confidence in my craft as a journalist, my creative voice I was losing, I had lost confidence in my worth because I was believing those lies. And it had gotten so bad that I even struggled to tell my mom, who had been, the one that I confided in most of my young childhood years. So it had become super dire, very severe. But that's when I knew that I had to turn and kind of dig my heels in deep. And I asked the Lord, And that's the key in my story. And Terry, I would encourage anyone, no matter how low, how hopeless you feel, how far you've run, if you just invite the Lord into your real, he will show up for you.
Amen.
He will give you that
Amen.
comfort and that peace that you need, because he is so real. All he's wanting you to do is to turn and to look into his gaze alone.
Yeah.
So the healing coming out of the abusive season of my life, it took honestly a few years. And I don't know how much time you have, but that's like a whole other podcast, how you practically walk a journey of healing out. So there were some practical steps there. And I knew, like, I wanted freedom. I wanted healing. There was, that strength down in me. I had that much of the word and my mama's voice, in the back of my head. So I got plugged into a really good church. And honestly, I left that station, and I was so much of a mess. I ended up back in my hometown just to get grounded. Like I couldn't even land a job for a while. I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I was capable of anymore. So God's grace in that season, it was so important because I was fragile. But he brought some amazing people in my life who were like mentors to me in my next job and at my church. And those relationships were life to me. I had an amazing, almost like a big sister. I ended up working at a local radio station, and she was one of the DJs on the air as well. And she just kind of took me under her wing and started praying with me, and prayed a very specific prayer for only God's best for my life. Whew. And things completely changed. When you pray those crazy, dangerous prayers, you can guarantee there's going to be some stuff that happens, like a big disruption, in some of your relationships, and potentially your own dreams for your life. But that's when the whole trajectory of my life shifted. And here we are today.
Yeah. So Kat, I think that's a good place to put a bookmark there and kind of keep people on the edge here, because that was a great overview of your story. And man, there's just so much to unpack there. And so I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned growing up, you had a really close relationship with your mom. As a marriage and family therapist, we talk a lot about attachment and how, hey, we need to teach our kids that they can come to us regardless of what they're feeling, and know that we can give them love and comfort and relief. And it sounds like you had that with your mom growing up.
Absolutely. And she came from a line of women who were nurturing and yet very strong. My grandmother was one of the first to be a business owner back in like the 1940s and 50s. So yeah, they were very much about independence. Like, yeah, make your own way. You can do this, like the greatest generation, they were raised by those folks.
Yeah.
Like, figure it out. Right. But she absolutely had that sweet, nurturing spirit. And the word that comes to mind is just grace. She had so much grace and patience with me through all of my stages. I mean, we've all been teenagers before, right?
Yep.
And now I'm a mom of a teenager. And I so appreciate my mother. Like, she was a saint.
Right.
Grace. Grace is the key. And asking the Lord to have his heart for those young ones that you may be responsible for. And here's another key. Ask the Lord, who do you want to encourage today in my path? Because, we live in a fatherless generation, right? I mean, the stats, Terry. I'm sure you do. I think it's like almost 60% now of our generation, and the younger ones don't have a dad in the house. They come from a broken home. So they don't even have that foundation of security and safety And then that opens the Pandora's box for wherever they're getting their influence, right? Wherever their influences are coming from. And sadly, a lot of the time it's this thing, right? Your devices, your favorite music artist, a celebrity of some sort, whatever message is being pumped out over the airways that you're listening to. So my plea is for all, not only the moms and pops out there, but for maybe you're a single person, but the Lord has been putting, the next generation on your heart. Maybe, you're an aspiring youth minister, or the Lord just, highlights those younger generations and children to you. Be praying for them, because there is a huge battle over their future. And Terry, we know the end of the story, right? It's Isaiah 60. We are the church, and the Lord wants to use these young ones. They are the young saints. Nations and kings will be drawn to our light, who is Christ Jesus inside of us. But somebody has to tell these kids. Somebody has to show these children what the love of God really looks like.
Yeah. And it sounds like you had that, with your mom and growing up. What was your relationship with your dad like growing up, Kat?
My dad was phenomenal. He was always an athlete, so he kind of modeled the discipline piece. He was very loyal growing up, and he loved to read. And he was a little bit more of a quiet person, family-wise. But they were so committed to one another, and it will be almost 50 years, I believe. They're coming up on like a golden anniversary very soon, and you just don't hear about that very much.
Right.
So you should interview them. How do you make it to 50 years, right? I don't know. A lot of grace. I think that's the hashtag of this episode. I have a feeling.
Yep. Already there it is. Hashtag grace. I've heard in other interviews you've done, Kat, that your mom was actually a beauty pageant contestant in her. I don't know, how old would she have been when she was doing that?
So she was like 18, 20, 21, pretty young. And she was a state winner and went on to Miss America. And then after that, she had an agent in California and tried her hand at acting and singing. But quickly the Lord showed her that was not his best for her life. Though she had all the talent in the world and probably could have gone far, her story, and she would tell you that she had a lot of conviction. And a lot of the roles that were being offered to her as a young, kind of up and coming actress, she was not comfortable with. So she passed. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, yeah, like you said, that just goes to show the convictions that she has, right? How many people get those offers from Hollywood and, see kind of, the temptations there to make a big name for yourself and to get the money and to get all this stuff. And it sounds like her focus was, no, I don't want to glorify myself. I want to glorify God.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And again, we were talking about, our upbringing from our parents. She was raised in a Christian home, and she absolutely knew right from wrong. And there was just a real strong conviction alarm going off. So I think that industry, it's always kind of like the sex sells and, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's kind of like all, the different, bait that they tease generations with. But she absolutely felt she would not, participate in any of those things, could not represent that, did not want to promote that. So she decided to put that dream to the side. And then her life completely changed after that. And she was one of the first women youth ministers to be a director for youth ministry where she was growing up. Wow. So the Lord rewarded her And,
Yeah.
if we're all, here on earth to make influence, we have to ask ourselves, what is our motivation? Is it to build our platform? But when you're a believer, the word says that we were bought with a price. We are not our own. So the Lord is looking for those faithful hearts who lead with character and integrity, who will expand his kingdom and will use those platforms to share the truth. And so
Right on.
she became a youth minister and a director at that time. And she was very young and the first in her area to be a director, which was pretty pioneering for a women in the middle of the women's lib movement.
Right.
Isn't God hilarious? You just put those two things together. I love his
Ye-
humor. So that's my
Right.
mom's story.
That's incredible, Kat. I'm wondering. I mean, man, your mom accomplished so much, right? She did the beauty pageants, and now she's the first female director of ministry in her area. With mom kind of setting such a high bar and standard in her life. As you were growing up, did you ever feel, maybe not from her, but just an inner sense of like pressure or, man, I have to live up to what she's done?
You would think, right? But never. She, again, the word grace, right?
There
Her
it is.
personality, she was very humble. And she would never talk about her resume or what she's done, or not even in conversation. And so honestly, it didn't really come up. I guess the biggest effect that I felt was when, she would invite me along as a kid and she would drag me to these pageants that she would be judging. And that was just a short season. And she was always real encouraging to all the young ladies who were like pageant contestants. And they, looked at her with those big eyes because she had been a winner and she had been in Miss America. But my mom was always so encouraging and so humble and a true queen in my book. She led with humility and always raised up other leaders. That's mark of a true leader, when you raise up other leaders
Yeah.
and lead with character and grace. Yeah, my hat is off to my mom. She is my hero.
Yeah. Man, that's again just incredible. Just hearing about the humbleness that she had, and just her servant heart, really is what I'm seeing and hearing it, and you sharing her story there. Kat, for you growing up in the church and having faith, what was that like, especially like coming into teenage years, right? I mean, as we've been talking about, teenage years can be difficult. It can also be a time where people that grew up knowing Jesus their whole life maybe kind of start to wander off a little bit as they're exposed to other influences. And so what was your faith like throughout your teenage years? I guess, what were your teenage years like in general for you?
Honestly, I just remember having this low frequency of anger the whole time. But isn't that a teenager, right? I mean, you feel entitled, you're angry. Yeah, I grew up in the 80s, 90s, so that was like the birth of punk rock, and everybody
Yep.
had, something on their mind that they were so passionate about, and they sung about it. So, yes, I feel like I was just a typical teenager. And my mom, coming from the church, knew the benefit of consistency. And so she would get us involved in church. She didn't push us, but she led by example. So we ended up going, my sister later, and myself. And I remember going to like Wednesday nights, which was our youth night. And at the time, we went to a church that later became a really big mega church in the area I grew up at. And looking back, like I do remember, like the people that were leading, they were young themselves. Some of them were newly married, and I just remember kind of like, in a way, the sacrifice that they all made, to pour into and to teach the truth. And, Yeah. Because of their consistency, you know, there was a lot of truth built back into my foundation. Even though I may not have been catching everything, I remember that it was a safe place to go. I remember I could trust the folks there. The church was phenomenal, and they ran their staff on a protocol of integrity and character. My mother later worked for that church as well for 20 plus years. So my hat is off to that whole team, and they really had a heart for youth.
Yeah, man, it sounds like that foundation was so solidified that even during maybe those angsty teenage years, like you always knew, like, hey, like, no, this is my home. This is what I believe. I'm not gonna, even with punk rock and all those influences that, yeah, they can do their thing, but I still know this is the straight and narrow here, the right way here. And so,
Yeah, I mean, like I didn't know at first, but that's the beauty of casting seeds.
yes.
It's like his word, right? He talks about it will never go out and return void. They're seeds. They're always going to be there in the soil, and I think that's the beauty of it. Even though I may not have been resonating at the time, the seeds were there, and there for me during a season in my life years later when I was at my bottom, after I had experienced those years of verbal and emotional abuse in the workplace. And it was that foundation that caused me to turn and open my heart to the Lord because of all those seeds that had been planted when I was a kid, when I was in VBS, Sunday school, and when I was a teenager. All those seeds, they were still there in the soil and there for me during a really tough season in my adult life.
Man, that's just a great reminder, Kat, of just the power and the importance of just, like you said, planting seeds. Like, again, you may be, I'm talking to everyone listening to this, you may be someone who just plants a seed in somebody's life and then that's it. Someone else comes along to water it and to fertilize it and to grow it. But none of that starts without a seed being planted. And you had so many people planting seeds in your life, Kat. And like you said, like, obviously, I mean, you're living proof of the fruit of all that. And again, before we get into all that, once you turn 18, you graduate high school, did you have any idea of what you wanted to do with your life?
I did. And I was a real rare one at that. I had this big justice streak. I mean, it is like steel in my backbone. And I always wanted to go into journalism because I believed in truth telling and the effects of that and the freedom that can bring to communities. Yep, that was always the plan. Actually, when I was in middle school, that started being kind of cultured within me, and I always had an interest in watching the news. I know, like middle school kid watching the news, that sounds so weird, but it was always of interest to me, and I wanted to hear the stories because I loved listening to stories. I loved good storytelling. I loved reading, and I attribute that to my dad. And I loved the truth piece, and how that can bring so much healing and freedom to communities.
Yeah.
So that was my plan, and I was working actually in high school. I was one of those overachiever people. Yep, one of those, right? Eye roll, cue the eye roll. But I had my plan, and yeah, I just loved it. It was like candy to me. I absolutely had a passion for journalism and writing, and then storytelling as an art. So that's what I ended up doing. And because I am a bit of an overachiever, I thought, hey, what would happen if I start submitting some of my news stories to some, awards, or, like a film or a media or journalist society? where you can, receive an award for that and recognition. And I started doing that. And it just proved to me, you shouldn't put a ceiling on yourself. Like, I always ask myself, what would happen if I did? And even if I failed, I learned, and I always took it as a lesson of teaching. That was a big thing that I noticed, actually, in how my mom lived her life, and watching her judge years of pageants and consistently seeing the same contestants show up the next year because they had learned from their failures a year ago, right? So all the seeds, Terry, I was learning. So I put that into practice for myself in my career. And that is the same bar. I don't compete with anyone else but myself. And again, at the end of the day, it's like, what would happen if I did? What would happen if I submitted this to that local film festival? So fast forward all these years later, and I am in my mid-40s. And my husband and I, we have a film series that we produce. We have a production company that is part of our mission. We produce films that share the hope of Jesus on Amazon Prime and Roku. And a couple of years ago, started asking that question, what if we submitted some of these films? What would happen? And they have been nominated for some awards.
Wow.
And that's not why we do it, okay? That's not the reason. But I am saying this because the Lord cares about your desires, your hopes, your dreams. Like, he loves that stuff. He's like, I put that gift within you. Let's just push it and see where we can go. He loves the artistic piece. And when we partner with him, it can be such an adventure and so fun. But our mission is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ through different art forms, through film, through a podcast, and we have a few books, and share it in different formats to as many people as we can. And you literally can reach the world because of social media platforms today. Like yourself, Terry. You're reaching the world.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to your point, your story is not done. I mean, that just randomly came on my feed, right? I mean, like you said, it literally can reach the world, and I absolutely love what you and George are doing. But again, putting a bookmark there, kind of going back a little bit, again, wanting to get into journalism and becoming an anchor woman and news reporter and things like that. Obviously, you have to have like some type of camera presence and stuff, right? So I'm wondering, did teenage Kat, did young adult Kat, did she look herself in the mirror practicing reading the news, or like were you involved in any type of activities or like clubs that kind of helped you refine those skills?
Yes. So there was a local TV station that had a high school show that they aired every Saturday morning, and the different students from different high schools around the county that I grew up in. And it was really cool. So we all kind of had our parts to play and shared about some real issues that the youth were struggling with. I love the heart behind the show because they talked about the real issues. They gave real help. They shared about outreaches that were helping kids that might be struggling with depression or bullying, alcoholism, and drug use. And at the time, I thought that was pretty cool because it was airing on a Saturday morning, kind of at a sweet spot as far as ratings go for youth. And they just let us local teenagers kind of take over, but there was a real respect for the subject matter. There was an honor in that, and we felt a sense of responsibility. So that was my first experience in front of a camera. But again, it was more about connecting with the viewers, like friends that you wanted to share the truth with to help bring freedom and healing, right? Again, this is part of my passion. It was just a whole other confirmation piece for me going in this direction, which turned out to be broadcast news. And I was a reporter. I wasn't an anchor person. I loved reporting. I loved being in the field, mixing with real people. Much respect to all the anchors and the air conditioning, reading their scripts. I mean, I love that. That was always a coveted spot, right?
Right.
But for me, I wanted to be in the field. I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to get that exclusive. So we're just a different breed. We're different breed. TV reporters. They'll just about do anything, honestly. But learned a ton in that season. And every summer when I was in high school, I will share this with your viewers, that was a key time to intern. So I made a goal for myself to hit most of the main network affiliates and intern at one each year. And then when I had the opportunity to go to college, blessed by that, I started working at the local stations there in my college town, as well as going to school. So for me, it was just adding and stacking that resume. Experience. There was nothing too little that I would say no to. Did, camera work, editing. I edited commercials. Worked at all kinds of different stations, worked at a newspaper. And that was amazing. My hat is off to all the news journalists out there. So learned a lot, and have so much respect for the folks in that field. Storytellers, so creative, intuitive, perceptive, and their heart really is to connect with the community. I believe that. They really care for the people that they are serving.
Yeah. Well, Kat, that's amazing that even in high school, you had that opportunity to start kind of getting your feet wet in that field. And what stands out to me is how driven you were even then. It sounded like you very much knew that, hey, this is what I want to do. And you didn't wait for opportunities to come to you. You sought them out. You went to all the local affiliates, and you were, working for the newspapers and doing all this stuff. And where does that come from? Does that also come from mom and just seeing her be a real go-getter?
Absolutely. And really my entire family on both sides of the family, we were very tight-knit cousins. And they would even tell you today, it was because your mom had set such a high bar, for all of us. And they were very open about that. And they were older than I was, so a lot of them experienced, her journey through all the different stages she had been through the pageant stuff, and then, acting and singing and all the training that she had done for years and years and years. Because they had sacrificed, honestly, to help her get prepared for those seasons, certainly in those pageant years. But yes, it had it planted seeds. It planted seeds.
Yeah.
The entire family. Yes.
Awesome. So then, Kat, you go to school, and where did you go to school?
I went to college in a little town called Bowling Green, Kentucky. And it was a small school, but it was a liberal arts program. So they had a really strong journalism department, one of the best in the country. And I actually grew up in Kentucky. So to me, it was just a no-brainer, and had a really wonderful, strong department lead that almost like a counselor, that she would, like a guidance counselor, but for my major. And so I would always be trying to brainstorm and kind of leverage all of my internships, what my current goals were, and then forecasting forward too. So had a very good communication with my guidance counselor for my major. And he was always, looking out for more opportunities too. And that is actually how I got a job straight out of college at a great market. It was an NBC affiliate. So yes, I highly, highly encourage people to, talk and ask, brainstorm, with your guidance counselor, get a 5-year plan, and start executing that. It doesn't hurt. Like, what can you lose? Make some phone calls and just see where it's going to take you.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's part of being a go-getter too, right? Advocating for yourself instead of just waiting for opportunities to come. And Kat, here you are, you're in college, 4 years, you get your degree, you get this job. And I would imagine, it's almost kind of like, all right, everything's kind of falling into place and going exactly kind of how I wanted it to. But then here you are with, I think you said it was your boss who is being verbally, emotionally abusive to you. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that. Like, what was that like? Can you even remember like the first instance or the first interaction that you had with him where it's just like, oh no, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So something important I have to bring up. I never wanted to disappoint anyone in my life. That is, I think, a strength and also a weakness. People pleasing, right? May have heard that term. I was a classic people pleaser. So going into the news business, the dynamic in live news, everything is late and breaking. In the newsroom, you've got the squealing of the police coding. You hear it's like this apparatus that always tells you the codes, emergency codes, and so you always have that going on in the background. So it's noisy, it's loud. There's always a sense of honestly stress. It's very intense. And at the end of the day, you want to be the first one to get the lead, to get the exclusive. So there's always, like a ribbon of competition woven in, even kind of among your peers a little bit. So that dynamic, you're walking on eggshells all the time. So they're just kind of a rough bunch of people. They mean well, and their heart is for the community, but it's rough. It's really rough. And the things that you will see on these stories, my eyes were open. I was very young. I was 18 years old when I landed that position
Wow.
at an NBC affiliate, and saw some stuff that I had never seen before. Dead bodies, body parts. What a meth lab looks like, a meth explosion in a house, went on, like car chases, went in the helicopter, searching for people on the run. It was just very eye-opening. And then there's like the political side of things. You have to cover local government, understand the infrastructure of how local government and politics are run. And the court system, right? So there's all of these things, a ton of pressure. It's a ton of pressure. And I made a mistake, a couple of mistakes on a story. And my boss was infuriated. He had gotten a phone call by the gentleman that I had interviewed. And honestly, it wasn't a real controversial story. I remember it was like a feature. It was, I don't know. So I made a mistake in that, and I can't even tell you exactly what it was, but I heard about it, and I remember the yelling, and I remember the threats, and then just the it was more this person's body language, right? So anyone that is caught up in rage, when they have no self-control and they're pacing back and forth, and you can feel, I mean, you're kind of scared for your life because it's that imminent. You feel like there's danger, that you are in danger. So when it hits that level, right, you start to break down. And I was very scared, coming back the next day. As a consequence, my stories were scrubbed for a while, meaning that everything that was about to go out over the air, my scripts that I wrote, and before I could be on camera, he had to look over and make sure that they were correct. And I learned from that season to make sure that everything is accurate, absolutely everything. And I was lucky that the story that I was reporting on was not controversial. I mean, that was God's grace in all of this. So what I learned from that was trying just to keep a cool head, which was very hard to do as the days and months went on. And I should make reference of this. That individual was later fired for harassing some other staff members. So clearly this individual had some mental health issues going on for a long while. And a lot of the staff members would talk about that. So I hate bringing up details, because each person has their own struggles. Yeah. And may not know a kind and loving Savior. They may not have ever had that foundation laid within them. Clearly, this individual felt all of the soul pressure on himself alone.
Yeah. And
he broke. And he paid for it with his health, too. Sad to say. So that I learned a massive lesson out of that, to have grace. But you have to be real, because the news industry is wild. It's messy. It's loud. People are all the time on short fuses, will say things they will not mean. But at the end of the day, they just want a rating, right? They just want to be number one. So it's tough. It's tough. You just get kind of hard and cold to it over time. That's what happens. You become numb. And saw a lot of that. But it's not like that in every station.
Well, good. And I'm sorry that was your experience, unfortunately. And like you said earlier, Kat, you needed to be there, what did you say, 2 years in order to be able to use it on a resume?
Yes, for that station to count. So I was determined, I'm going to make that 2 years count. So it's a little line on my resume now.
Yeah. How were you able to do that, Kat, in the face of, on a daily basis, dealing with all of that? What got you through? Obviously, there was the motivation, the incentive of, I'm going to, someday use this on a resume. This isn't going to be a complete waste, right? But how did you get through it when you would come home and you were just kind of feeling the heaviness of all that, you were experiencing during that time? What did you do? How did you get through those 2 years?
Oh, to be perfectly honest, cried every day. Would come home and just not speak and internalize. And it was compounded every single day. Again, that's that slow fade. And I was experiencing a depression from the compounding of that verbal and emotional abuse. And again, because of the person that I am, I was a people pleaser. So I took it personally, and I felt it deeply, deeply. So, for some people, they were able to last, more years than just the 2 that I could, and may still be there today, honestly. But yeah, for me, it was a breaking point, and I wasn't very graceful about it. I always carried concealer with me every day, packing on the makeup because I had been crying the night before. And secondly, I had to pray and ask the Lord to be real and to help get me through the day. And the Lord is so gracious, Terry. He really cares. He really cares. One day, in the middle of the whole process of trying to survive a day, had the idea to ask the Lord to help me create a story that would be picked up by the network, on the network feed. Put up a prayer, had no idea what my assignment would be for that day. What ended up happening, come 5 o'clock, my story would be picked up on the NBC feed and MSNBC. So I started playing that with the Lord. And God knew I was desperate. I was desperate. Now, He wasn't making me stay at this station. That was my choosing. I just got to say that very clear. Again, call it pride, overachiever in me. I could not get out of that station before my 2 years was up. That resume meant too much. And God's grace, He heard my heart's cry, and I think He may have done a little sigh, like, okay, daughter, if you have to, But I started asking Him, let's do this again, Hey, can my story be picked up by the feed again? That was a few days later. And it would happen. It would happen. So He gave me almost a cookie trail of hope in those days where I was literally surviving day by day. And he brought a phenomenal, one of my shooters, my camera guys, was a Christian. They hired him about halfway through my tenure of being there. And just the sweetest guy. And we would pray in the car rolling out, the SAP truck rolling out to the story. So the Lord was providing for me. Yeah, providing for me.
I think of the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt and God's provision of the manna on a daily basis, right? And it sounds like, He was doing that for you as well in a different way, obviously, but like each day either giving you, this story that, maybe made it to the network feed, or just like you said, the coworker that came along and now you got a fellow Christian and prayer buddy to get you through the day. Like, I just see God's goodness over all of that right there, Kat.
And that's what this whole journey in life is about. It's not about getting to the destination. And I just have to say that. It's about this journey and how real He is. It's like every facet of His character, the kindness, the comfort, the answer, the hug that you need, the surprise, the little cookie trail of hope to get you through those valleys of darkness and confusion. That's what this journey is all about. It's an example of how real He is and how interested He is and what you're interested in.
Yeah, He's in the details. He's in the details of every facet of our lives. And Kat, a couple of times there you mentioned, being a people pleaser. And I think with that, because I used to be a huge people pleaser myself as well, with that kind of comes a level of perfectionism, at least in my case. I don't know if it was for you, but where do you think that came from? The whole mentality of being a people pleaser, attaining a level of perfection, where did that come from?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I believe we're all, born with a sinful nature, and, that's part of living in a fallen world. And yeah, I think, more often than not, we see examples of relationships where people are rewarded for the lengths that they will go to, by, sad to say, maybe folks that have control or manipulation at their heart. that's in a lot of music and entertainment and movies today, right? That storyline. So I think we kind of get, we can get easily programmed with hearing and believing that. But the truth is that, no matter, we're human beings first, not human doings. And that phrase is very freeing for me, because I've always felt like I had to achieve or produce, like be involved to feel like I am helping God. But that's a false belief. God does not need my help, He just wants me to come to trust Him and receive, just to receive. That has always been very difficult. And I have no idea where that came from. I mean, again, I come from a long line of amazing people that set high bars for themselves, and they achieved those. And maybe that's, a little bit of the pattern that I come from. But I never really saw that as a bad thing. I saw that as an inspirational thing. So that pattern absolutely, I think, can be beneficial,
Definitely. Well, then, Kat, you get through those 2 years at that station, and by the grace of God, right? There's that word again, grace. You get through those 2 years, and you said earlier that you just were burnt out. Like you had to literally go back to your hometown and just kind of, it sounds like just kind of decompress and just kind of figure out like, whoa, like what's going on? What am I going to do with life? So kind of pick the story up there, Kat. Where did life take you after those 2 years? You come back home looking for direction. What happens next?
I was a mess, Terry. I couldn't put a sentence in front of the next. After 2 years of enduring verbal and emotional abuse, I was done in my career, and I honestly had no idea. The person who had been so sure of my path and my dreams had no idea what I was going to do next. I was tapped out completely. I really needed grounding, and I had enough sense to know I needed to take a step back. I'm not going to find another project and distraction and bulldoze my way through to try to find myself in that distraction. I knew I had to slow down and get redirected to true north. And again, because of all the seeds that have been sown in my life up until that point, the Lord has always been my true north. So that was a reason for why a homecoming. I had to go back to my hometown and ground myself. And I gave myself a couple of weeks permission just to cry, to feel the hurt, to feel the confusion, and try to sift through dealing with the initial pain. Because, again, I had canned it for years. You have to turn on because you're in front of the camera. So again, putting on the concealer. But at that mark in my life, I said, no, I've got to be real and let this out. I knew that was the healthy thing. So after a couple of weeks, I knew I had to start thinking about a job. And I started seeking what I only knew, which was in news. And I reached out to some big stations, and I started talking with them and getting my resume tape updated to send out. But I was in a holding pattern because the stations where I wanted to end up at didn't have positions open at the time, and they would give me a time frame, due to their talents contracts. So we're talking like, call us back in 6 to 9 months and we'll let you know. And I had to do something within that time frame to make some money. So I called my local radio station. It was a Christian radio station, and they happened to have a sales job available. But I had called for a DJ slot because back in high school, I had DJ'd for like a minute. for like a hot minute. It's like their overnight DJ. And to make a long story short, they hired me for the position they had open, which was sales. They did not have any DJ positions open at the time, but I was happy to be back, kind of in the media world, and that pace, because I was always used to that, and started doing radio sales. Now that's a whole other conversation. And it was really challenging because it was a nonprofit station. So how do you do sales when it's a nonprofit?
Right.
You cannot sell on a nonprofit. So I learned a lot and gained a lot of relationships with area ministries, which was phenomenal. It was so great, and met some really precious people. Again, this was back in Kentucky. I went back home to get grounded in Kentucky, and really awesome radio station. I'm going to give a shout out to 88.5 WJIE. They're based in Louisville, Kentucky, and have like this crazy reach that it's humongous. It reaches like across half of the U.S.
Wow.
Wonderful people that poured into me, and one of those happened to be one of the morning show DJs, a lady by the name of Karen Allen, who took me under her wing. I don't know why, but, and we just had this sisterly connection. And so she started inviting me to join her family on weekends. And they were awesome faith people. She would minister. She would go and speak at women's conferences. And she would always invite me to tag along. So it was, again, seeds to me. And I really admired, she was a married woman. She was a professional, kicking butt in her career. Had an incredible overcoming story herself. So I just had a lot of respect and watched her train up her children. And it was a second marriage for them. So I would go over sometimes on the weekend and just hang out and spend the night with the kids. And I just saw how she and her husband did life and how it wasn't perfect. It was messy, but they loved each other and they talked it out in a kind, gracious grace, #grace on this podcast. They were very gracious towards one another. So that was a huge deposit in my life. And I started thinking, oh, I wonder if there's somebody out there for me. And honestly, I had never been interested in settling down. I was all about the career. That had been my identity. Was never interested. I dated some dudes, but honestly, I was just like, this is a waste of time. I'm going to cut you free because I don't want to hurt you. So, But Karen started praying this crazy prayer for God's perfect will to be done in my life. That prayer, that changed everything. And I owe her so much for her loyalty as a friend and seeing things in me, the potential I had no idea was there. And to say at this moment that I was a selfish person, only had been thinking about my plans, my dreams, how I could change the world up to that point, understatement. When she started praying that, the Lord started putting that dream in my heart of a family and possibly what kind of guy could handle me, like, okay, game on, So God just kind of threw open the door, and not too long after that, this gentleman walked into the radio station. And he needed to buy some radio ads for a concert that his ministry was promoting. And I knew this guy. He was kind of a local celebrity in the Christian ministry world in Kentucky. His name was George, and the ministry carried a lot of weight. So at the time, this was early 2000s, they were putting on these crazy, awesome, rad concerts with Toby Mac and Rachel Lampa and groups like hip hop artists like Grits, and they were helping up and coming bands who were more hardcore, and this was before hardcore Christian music was ever a thing. This was like early 2000, okay? But they were helping these guys and giving them platforms at their concerts and preaching the gospel and partnering with these amazing outreaches. So I knew who this guy George was, and I'd heard about Revolution, and I was a little bit awestruck. I'm not gonna lie. So when I walked into our meeting, because I happened to be his rep for that meeting, I was rendered speechless. I kid you not. God answered Karen's prayer. I had all the bells and whistles. God is so good. I had never, ever been attracted to anybody in that, it's up to that point. But when I saw him, it was like, this guy, he's either taken or he's taken. Because he was all that and so like charming and confident. And immediately I was just interested, and I could not operate the calculator that day. In the meeting, I was just so frazzled. I'm like, oh, this guy is hot. What am I gonna do? And to make a long story short, we had our first date that afternoon. And 12 days later, we were engaged.
Wow.
I don't condone that, but that's how it happened for us. The Lord gave me all the bells and whistles. That's a whole other backstory, how the Lord bonded us together so quickly. But in meeting George Vazquez, the first day, I heard his heart for the Lord, his heart for the next generation, for youth. God had been giving him dreams and visions, and he had been on a hot pursuit, just like I had in my career world. He had been on a mission for Jesus to help spread the gospel and save souls. So we were married a little later that year, and a year after that, we consecrated that first year, just to have some wonderful foundational time together. And but a year later, we rebranded Revolution Ministries, and God gave him a vision saying that he needed to take it to television. And I said, hey, I'm your girl. We can do that, no problem. And we ended up going to a summer festival and interviewing our first artists. Some were ministers. We interviewed artists like Skillet and Flyleaf. Oh my goodness, there were some amazing, amazing bands back in the day. And that's how we got our content to create a pilot. And we created a show called the Revolution TV, which was picked up by some major religious networks really quickly. We didn't have a plan to sell it, and the Lord just kind of organically connected those dots for us. People heard about it, and it was kind of pioneer at the time. You remember iPods?
Yep.
So around that time when the iPods came out, one of our friends cracked the code and was able to load our pilot episode onto the iPod.
No
and
way.
It was because of that. Yeah, yeah, it was crazy. Hackers back in the day, God bless them. That is how we were picked up and started on a huge religious network. And we were just kids, didn't know what we were doing. But 16 seasons later, and
Wow.
we were airing around the world. And looking back, it gives me goosebumps. Some of the emails that we received all over the world, folks in prison. There was a California penitentiary that allowed a certain religious network to air into their penitentiary. And we were receiving letters from inmates. And
Praise
it
God.
just so touched my heart. And I thought, thank you, God. Thank you, Lord. This is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. And it was during that time that the seed was planted for another film series called Your Story Is Not Done, speaking to those folks who feel disqualified, feeling like what they did is too bad. It is too awful. The Lord would never want them back in the family. And we knew that we had to reach out and share the truth that the Lord loves you no matter what. So that was the seed for our next film series, which currently airs today on Roku and Amazon Prime, and that's called Your Story Is Not Done. It's a film series, mini documentaries, and the first one showcases Brian Head Welch, who is a member of the rock band Korn, Grammy Award-winning band Korn. He shared the story along with his daughter of how initially he knew that he had to step away from his band and run after his little girl. He stepped away from the whole touring life, being on band tours, and wanted to be a father in the mix and had to learn what that looked like. And stepped away from drug addiction and alcoholism. So that was our very first episode that airs on Amazon. And then we have a number of other stories, and our most recent is coming out this next month, and it's featuring the gentleman from the band Journey who wrote the song Don't Stop Believin', Jonathan Cain, and he shared the real backstory of how those lyrics came to be. So personal for him and his life. They were words that his father spoke to him during a time in his life where he almost turned his back on his career. Very excited for that release on Your Story Is Not Done. That is film 4, which is coming out in March. And you can find more of the episodes and the links to watch those films on our website, which is yourstoryisnotdone.com.
Yeah, go check it out, and I'll link that all below so it'll be easy for you guys to find. But yeah, like you said, Head Welch and Annie Lobert, Annie Lobert, she's like someone who I love her, and I haven't even met her. Like hopefully I can get her on the podcast, but she's got an amazing story, and you guys being able to document that and get that out to the world to see. I just love it. And I mean, this has become like a multifaceted kind of media conglomerate for you guys here. I mean, it started, like you said, with the Revolution TV, and now it's Your Story Is Not Done. And it's not just a film series, but you guys, both you and George, have written books as well. And so let's talk a little bit about your book, Kat, Rain, where you talk about identity. I'm a huge proponent of just speaking life into people's identity and for them finding their identity in Christ. And Lord knows this generation needs it more than ever. And so tell us a little bit about your book, Kat.
Well, again, the seed for that book did start during the darkest time of my life as a career woman in the news business, and after I had experienced years of verbal and emotional abuse. During that season of recovery, after I had returned home, there was a really beneficial tool. I always loved to write. That's who I am. So I started journaling and journaling the process of healing out. So during my quiet time with the Lord, I'd have my Bible out and my journal. And every day I would ask him this question: how do you see me? I had gotten, again, so ripped down. I did not even know my worth, my value. my value. And that is what verbal abuse can do. And years of that, you completely doubt not only your voice, but your worth and your value. So, who knows better than our Creator? So I started asking him, and I would listen, and I would jot down scriptures that would come to mind, because Holy Spirit is so real. He's always speaking to us. Some folks can hear him audibly. Some folks see visions. They have dreams. But here's the thing: if we just still ourselves and pay attention, he's always speaking. He's speaking in situations and circumstances around us, and in nature. He can use music that comes on the radio. He can use anything because he's God. And in that season, when I was journaling and asking him, how do you see me? He started showing me this huge concept that I was a part of a position called the bride of Christ. Every believer is. And this becomes so foundational to understanding who we are in him. That statement alone is so layered. It is so layered. And it took me years to even understand the dots connecting, that we are part of a collection called the Bride of Christ, the church. We are the burning ones. We are the saints. We are the ecclesia. And prophetically, what the Bible says about that position, the ecclesia, it's throughout the Bible. So I, journaled for years on this. It started as foundational and as personal as how he sees me. Psalm 139, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And just meditating on that scripture brought so much healing. And in that process, I would jot down these verses on Post-it notes, and I would put them up all over my house. In the car, on the fridge, the mirror in the bathroom, and I would confess them out loud. And that was a key, because I needed to remind my own ears of the truth. And that, with repetition, I started believing it, Terry. I really started believing. Gosh, I have a plan and a purpose for my life. And so that's how the seed of this book started. It was those puzzle pieces put together, and it all came together as this devotional. So it is a devotional. It's a 40-day devotional. But what we are teaching here, what the Lord was showing me that took me years, I wanted to condense down into 40 days. And they're brief devotions that speak to not only our identity in him, but what our purpose is here on the earth. We are his ambassadors, called to pull heaven's culture down into our society, to affect not only my heart for healing, but to affect our family, for restoration in our family, for restoration in our community, to bring heaven into the business sector, to bring heaven into the tech sector, into the entertainment industry, into media, into arts, into the education system, and into politics. That is our calling. We are his ambassadors. I was reading in Romans this morning, Romans 8:19, and it says all of creation is waiting for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. They are waiting for the sons and daughters of God to help liberate them from the bondage of this present age and the one that subjected that bondage. That's Romans 8. That is it right there. I was always intimidated by that passage. Like, creation is waiting for us to free them? Like, that is like Lord of the Rings stuff right there.
Right.
That is huge. But in a nutshell. And through this devotional, it looks as simple as asking the Lord, how can I partner with heaven today in my family, with my children, getting strategies for heaven in business, for your job. And the key is that every single day that we spend time with the Lord. Here's my sweet little guy. It's my youngest.
Hey, dude.
He's in here with me. Yes. And he is the reason right there, because it's the next generation, who will be carrying out the giftings and callings of God on the earth with power. They're the next prophetic generation, the Elijah generation. So it's loaded, but you can check out more on the book on my website, thereign.com, Reign, REIGN, book.com. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever online books are sold.
Awesome. And I'll link that as well so everyone can find it easily. And man, I was getting so fired up as you were talking there, Kat. You were just straight preaching there. And I loved it, because that's what it's all about. We are living from heaven to earth. At least that's what we should be, right? And it's so easy to get caught up in like, no, I'm living from earth to heaven. No. That's not our identity. That's not our inheritance. And so a 40-day devotional that speaks to that and encourages you to just go after all that God has for you and to be what God has called you to be. Sign me up. I love that. And another facet of your guys' ministry is the podcast. So tell us a little bit about the podcast, Kat.
Backstory podcast. So what we love to do is to feature folks' stories. So we invite people through a segment that we call Tell Us Your Story to shoot their testimony selfie style on their phone. We have some protocol. It needs to be under 3 minutes, but we invite people to send in their testimonies to our website, and we absolutely love sharing those. Here's the reason: because everyone who knows Jesus Christ has a redemption story, and your story could be the key to someone else's freedom.
Amen.
I often hear this question. I get asked this a lot. How do you evangelize? How can you share Jesus with a society today that counts themselves, not Christian? They're not in church. And I think the easiest way that we can all do that as believers is by sharing our story of how we met Jesus. Because by sharing our story, we are sharing the gospel, because the gospel changed our story. So that's easy. We all have a story. So that's what the Backstory podcast is for. We love to give a platform for folks to come on and to share. And George and I, we have a little moment sharing about something that the Holy Spirit has been putting on our heart. It's normally kind of a relevant in-season word, and we often ask a guest to join us who's got some expertise in that area as well. So our first season is all available through our website. They are currently on our YouTube channels. They were streamed live at Your Story Is Not Done, and also the Revolution TV. The Revolution TV is all one term. So those are available, but we cover subject matter like overcoming anxiety, fear, breaking the grip of anger and rage, breaking generational patterns, and walking into freedom when you've experienced abuse, when abuse has been part of your backstory. So we're so honored. Every single guest that we've had on have been speaking and teaching us as well. I think George and I get the most out of it because we're always taking notes. And we've got Valentine's Day a couple of days away, just giving the guys a heads up. treat your lady like a queen, not a few days. But we
Amen.
filmed an amazing Valentine's Day special episode that featured our personal pastors sharing their story, which is one of my favorites. One of my favorites. So encourage you guys to jump on and catch some of those the podcast episodes.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, again, Kat, that is right up my alley. And like you said, I loved what you said there. Your story might be the key to someone else's freedom. I mean, mic drop right there, right? And that's what I love even about doing this show. It's like you said, we all have a story. We've all been through crap in our lives. And sometimes it's just nice to know that, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. And if they were able to overcome it by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, then maybe I can too. You know, it just cultivates an atmosphere of encouragement and faith. And so I love everything you and George are doing for the kingdom, for just setting the captives free. It is so obvious that God's hand is over what you guys are doing. And again, this has been just a huge honor for me to talk with you, Kat. I'm wondering, before we go here, last question that I have for you, Kat, as you look back at the goodness of God in your life, what stands out to you?
His kindness and his grace. I'm going to be 45 in about 2 months. And I consistently see that thread so strongly throughout every season of my life. He always provided for me. He was always there comforting me when I turned to him. And that's the big key, because he's always there. He's just waiting for our eyes to meet his gaze. He's just waiting on us to invite him into our real. He loves you so, so much.
I love that. I love that, Kat. Kat, you and George are just warriors in the kingdom. You guys are powerful. What you do is powerful. Blessings to you, your guys' ministry. We'll have to keep in touch, because there's just so many similarities here. And any way we can partner together, you know, as brothers and sisters in Christ to build the kingdom, you know, that's what it's all about. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you're doing for the kingdom. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Bless you, brother. My hat is off to you, and we're honored to link arms with you for the King and his kingdom.